मैं दिख रहा हूँ क्या मैम? Okay, shall we start? Professor Inderjit Singh Sodhi, sir, are you there? Have you joined?
Yes, I have joined. Already joined.
Okay, sir. So, shall we start now?
Yes. Start.
Okay, sir. Okay, so a very good afternoon to all the distinguished speakers, panelists, and our participants who have joined here virtually this session, training program, 3 days training program on Prime Minister 10-point agenda on disaster risk reduction, which is being jointly organized by National Institute of Disaster Management, Government, Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India, and Rajiv Gandhi National Institute of Youth Development, Ministry of Youth, Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports, and I, Ajit Batham, young professional from Center for Early Warning and Communication, welcomes you all on behalf of NIDM. So, yes, let's start this session with welcome remarks from Professor Inderjit Singh Sodhi, who is the head of Department of Local Governance from Rajiv Gandhi National Institute of Youth Development. And sir, Inderjit sir, uh, over to you
Thank
for the
you.
welcome address.
So, on behalf of National Institute of Disaster Management, under the leadership of Major General M.K. Bindal sir, Manoj Kumar Bindal ji, as well as Rajiv Gandhi National Institute of Youth Development, under the director of Professor Shiv Devi, I welcome all the delegates and experts for 3 days this 10 agenda of disaster risk reduction. And I'm very much happy this 3 days program of this trainings program is working on, or there will be a special talk on Prime Minister's 10-point agenda, which is very important for disaster risk reduction. And first important point, that is their development and disaster. So it believes कि whenever
मैम एक बार आप
disaster.
कनेक्ट करेंगे ये उनकी
Hello,
तरफ से
am I audible? Ajit sir. Hello.
yes sir please carry on sir you are perfectly audible sir
So development is not properly planned, then definitely it will be more. So first point of Prime Minister 10 definitely is very much relevant, and all points are important. Even one 10-point agenda talk about women's role. Yeah, how women. So we all have to look into that. I'm happy that Professor Surya Prakash, who is chair of all 10 programs, which we are jointly organizing in partnership of National Institute of Disaster Management and Rajiv Gandhi National Institute of Management. Programs is being coordinated by Dr. Ajit. It is a young chap, and he experts on disaster and related aspect, whether it is disaster management or disaster risk reduction, as well as climate resilience. And I have seen all the good experts, and I believe these experts will help delegates participants about the disaster risk reduction and how this Prime Minister 10-point agenda of Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi, how far it would
sir
help.
sorry to interrupt you sir can you please switch off your video mode and continue with your audio mode because your I guess network connectivity is little bit low sir so it would be nice if you continue with the audio mode only.
So I was talking about this 10 lessons are there to sharpen your knowledge and make all the experts and respective areas. It would definitely help all the participants to understand. Welcome all the participants, and I believe it will be very fruitful. Yes. Thank you. Welcome all. Yes. Over to you.
Thank you, Professor Indrajit Singh Sodhi, sir, for your welcome remarks for this particular training program. And I would like to mention here that this is the last event which have been conducted, which is being conducted in collaboration with Rajiv Gandhi National Institute of Rajiv Gandhi Youth Development Institute. It is the 10th event we are conducting with them. It was it whole series of event we have planned with this particular Rajiv Gandhi National Institute of Youth Development. So now I would like to inform you all that Dr. Surya Prakash would also join us in a validation session. But before that, I have given the opportunity to present a brief introduction of Prime Minister 10-point agenda on disaster risk reduction. So let me share my screen first. So I would like to ask my panelists if my screen is perfectly visible or not.
Yes, visible, visible, visible.
Okay. So as I told that I have given this opportunity to introduce this Prime Minister 10-point agenda in a brief note. So let's start with this session with this particular presentation. So yes, so the Prime Minister 10-point agenda was first presented by Honorable Prime Minister of India in a conference named as Asian Ministerial Conference of Disaster Risk Reduction held in New Delhi in November 2016. And after the introduction of Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, uh, this particular Prime Minister 10-point agenda consists of the national as well as international dimensions. And so for which the work is needed to be done by keeping in view of each particular point. It is basically an all of society approach that include the active participation of state government, central government, central government departments, academia, and civil service organization in private sector. So now the PM 10-point agenda is a concrete idea to implement Sendai framework. Concrete idea is a throughout, which is sorry. Concrete idea is a thought which is deeply rooted, or we can say heavily based on reality. The Sendai framework was adopted by UN member states on 18th March 2015 at the third UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in Sendai city of Japan. The Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction 2015 to 30 is the first major agreement of the post 2015 development agenda, which with seven targets and four priorities. I will tell you about these seven targets and four priorities. The target says number one, substantially reduce global disaster mortality by 2030. The second one is substantially reduce the number of affected people globally by 2030. And the third one says direct economic loss in relation to global gross domestic product by 2030. The fourth point says substantially reduce the disaster damage to critical infrastructure and disruption of basic services, among them health and education facilities, including including through developing their resilience by 2030. The fifth target of this Sendai framework is substantially increase the number of countries which national and local disaster risk reduction strategies by 2020. Number 6 point says that substantially enhance international cooperation to developing countries through adequate and sustainable support to complement their national actions for implementation of this framework by 2030. And the last target of this particular Sendai framework is substantially increase the availability of and access to multi-hazard early warning systems and disaster risk information and assessment to the people by 2030. So these seven are the targets of this particular Sendai framework. This Prime Minister 10-point agenda also says this is the concrete idea for implementing Sendai. And there are also four priorities on which Sendai frameworks is adopted. The first is understanding disaster risk. Second is in strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk. Third one says in investing in disaster risk reduction to resilience. And the fourth priority of this Sendai framework is enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction process. And the another purpose of this PM 10-point agenda on DRR is sense of urgency. Sense of urgency means it means you always see things urgent, means you don't really wait for a situation when you are asked to deal with the situation urgently. This means you respect time. You have always a deadline to in your mind. So the next purpose is priority issues. Priority have also been set by these agendas. Now, let's move on to the first point of this Prime Minister 10-point agenda of disaster risk reduction, which says the mainstreaming disaster risk reduction in public expenditure, particularly infrastructure development. So, as here I mentioned that all development projects, whether it's airports, canals, hospitals, schools, bridges, are built to appropriate standards. These are some often called as a critical infrastructure. So all department, ministries, yes. So so what are the key action we should take in this point number one? That all line departments, ministries of government of India and all states and UTs to act as per various national guidelines issued by National Disaster Management Authorities and role and responsibilities assigned to them in National Disaster Management Plan 2019 towards disaster risk reduction and management. There should be a coordination between all the development sector as well, such as in the recent landslide that took place in Himachal Pradesh caused infrastructure loss uh, due to the lack of mainstreaming data principles within various concerned departments such as we can say Ministry of Road Transport and Highways, National Highway Authority of India, Border Road Organization, Public Works Department, etc. etc. And widespread of disaster risk reduction mainstreaming is needed for this purpose. Like in the point number second, it is mentioned that the mainstreaming disaster risk reduction in flagship schemes of government of India. Uh, it means the all the major projects which are being run by government of India and public private, even in with a public private partnership, it should be consist with the disaster risk reduction mechanism. The proper guidelines should be followed, which are laid down by national disaster management authorities, or uh, which are also developed by the various concerned agencies. So this is how we can achieve what here mentioned in the point number one. So here let's move to the point number two of Prime Minister 10-point agenda on disaster risk reduction. It says risk coverage for all, particularly for the poorest, or it is risk coverage must include all, starting from poor household to SMEs, that is small medium enterprises, to multinational corporation to nation states. So, what are the key actions in this particular point number two? So, the first point says development of disaster insurance mechanism for homeowners in disaster prone area. So there should be one mechanism which should be developed. There should be one mechanism developed that can help the homeowner who all are residing at the various disaster prone area uh, to uh, to insure themselves or their property uh, with the expected disaster. And the next point says development of parametric insurance for weather and climate related disaster. So parametric insurance is a non-traditional insurance product that offers pre-specified payouts and bets upon a trigger event. Trigger events depends on the nature of the parametric policy and can also include environmental triggers such as wind speed and and wind speed and we can say rainfall measurement. Such insurance policies being implemented in developing economies. Oftentimes, for agriculture insurance, such parametric insurance is used. Disaster management, disaster management plans of ministries, and what else we can do in this particular point number two. What key action also can be taken are such as disaster management plans of ministries, departments, and states to focus on all sector of people and institutions and act as per the role and responsibilities assigned in NDMP 2019, that is National Disaster Management Plan 2019 for different disasters. Involvement of SMEs, and that is small medium enterprises, private sectors, public private partnership, involvement of corporate and involvement of corporate sector in capacity building and resource development, knowledge management, etc. should be focused on. The risk should be, in this particular case, the risk should also be distributed proper among all the stakeholders. Risk coverage should be defined adequately. That is, what are the risks? What are the parameters of risk? These all should be defined, well defined, so that people can be aware with this risk. Options should also be explored in creating some dedicated insurance mechanism. Let's move on to the point number three of this Prime Minister 10-point agenda, which says greater, and which is one of the important point I must say. It says greater involvement and leadership of women in disaster risk management. And we can also say encourage greater involvement and leadership of women in disaster risk reduction. So this is the point number three. So what key actions can be or should be taken to achieve this particular point, whatever is says this point says. So the first point, the key action should be the include women among the new units of NDRF, that is the National Disaster Response Force and State Disaster Response Force under development. The next point says this sizable representation of women in development of voluntary schemes such as Abda Mitra. Here I would like to mention that in the state of Gujarat, it is already been adopted by Gujarat State Disaster Management Authority, and they have introduced Abda Sakhi for this Abda Mitra scheme also, for which clearly defines the involvement of women in disaster risk reduction activities. The next point says the priority training and sensitization of elected women representatives at the local level. The training and capacity building the capacity building of the local elected representative should be done so that it can be further disseminated to the other community. In order to promote greater involvement and leadership of women in disaster risk reduction, special emphasis to be laid by ministries, departments, and states to make an inclusive plan. Mm, with special emphasis on issues concern women only. Uh, what I also think that there is a need to promote women's for active participation in disaster risk reduction, as indicated in NDMP, that is National Disaster Management Plan 2019. Also is mentioned there. The plan also emphasizes on that as the disaster impacts are not gender neutral. So hence, there should be some adequate attention must be paid to promote gender justice and equality in post-disaster recovery programs. And yes, the role of women during reconstruction and recovery programs after disaster are to be given due consideration. For this is my view. And honor driven reconstruction, that is ODR, there's a term called ODR, honor driven reconstruction, is one way where women can take leadership role and monitoring implementation of safe housing technology. ODR is identified as a dignified approach encouraging individual house owner to implement safe building design and construction in natural disaster affected areas. There is a lot more for women. Uh, Women can also be empowered by creating the self-help group for livelihood opportunities. It needs to be beyond traditional income generation activities, and it should aim at enhancing skills as masons, carpenters, trading to local product, developing local shops and sanitation and other materials for this purpose. In the particular National Disaster Management Plan 2019, states have given responsibilities for empowering women, especially regarding the leadership in disaster risk reduction. Equality should be there. Only thereafter we can encourage women, and we will be able to achieve this point mentioned by Honorable Prime Minister of India. Further, there are also some challenges which we can face by achieving this particular point, which can be literacy, participation of women, and availability of resources and capacity building for the women, which we need to deal with first. So now let's move on to the point number 4, which is also one of very important point in terms of disaster risk reduction. That says invest in mapping disaster risk, covering all hazard, or we can say invest in risk mapping globally to improve global understanding of nature and disaster risk. This is point number 4. Okay, so these are some key actions that says number 1 says undertake national level disaster risk assessment along with online platform. I would like to mention here that the work on this particular point has already been started by developing a portal named NDMIS portal, that is National Disaster Management Information System portal, where you can see various disaster risk assessments online, whatever the studies have been conducted for the particular state. Every state is entering their data through this NDMIS portal. understanding risk is one of, here I would like to also mention that understanding risk is one of the 6 thematic area mentioned in National Disaster Management Plan for all the disasters, uh, for which include risk mapping and zonation, etc. The other 5, this is the one of the thematic area which has been mentioned in the NDMP 2019, which is risk mapping. The another 5 thematic areas which have been mentioned in NDMP 2019 are um, the climate change risk management, interagency coordination, investing in DRR structural measure. Structural measure means investing in to something to build to reduce the impact of disaster. And the next one is investing in disaster risk reduction in non-structural measure. That is, invest into create policies, plans, and planning. So these are, and the last one, with the last thematic area of this, which is been included in NDMP, is capacity development. So these are the 6 thematic areas on which NDMP 2019 is being introduced. Before investing, uh, before investing on hazard mapping, HRBCA should be done. That is, hazard risk vulnerability capacity assessment should be done before investing in hazard mapping. Integrated risk mapping should be, it should be integrated risk mapping, and it can be done by GIS, remote sensing, by using remote sensing, bathymetry, by developing flood hazard atlas. Uh, in, and if we want to map the risk of landslide, then there should be a slope mapping in landslide prone areas, and develop earthquake zonation map if there is earthquake prone area. Chemical mapping should also be done throughout the industries to risk chemical to risk to map the risk throughout the chemical industry. So this is the point number 4 and the key actions for this particular point. Let's move on to point number 5, that says leverage technology to enhance the efficacy of disaster risk management efforts. What are the key actions? Yes. The first key action for this particular point is to assess the efficacy of Indian disaster resource network and revive it with modification. Here I would like to mention the IDR, and the India Disaster Resource Network is a web portal where the authorities, the district disaster management authorities can fill can entry the detail of the particular resources available in their districts for the use in the wake of any disaster. So this portal should be assessed time to time, and modification can be done thereof. And here again, it says to develop a portal to map expertise and resources of highly specialized aspects of disaster response and increase the efficacy of early warning system for all major hazards. Uh, the I would emphasize on this point number 3, which says the early warning system for all major hazards throughout the application of technology. So here I would like to place an example of Odisha government. The Odisha government launched early warning dissemination system in the year of 2018, the first of its kind technology in India to simultaneously warn coastal communities and fisher folks about impending cyclones and tsunamis through siren towers. So we need more such innovative technologies to tackle disaster. Effective use of science and technology and technology uh, and traditional knowledge in all aspects of disaster risk reduction. Institutional arrangement and capacity development, whether it's institutional, human, community, and technology, for disaster risk reduction in mainstreaming DRR and creating the enabling environment for it emerging from the global practices. Deploying advanced technology and equipment to be included in the capacity building themes for disaster risk reduction. And we can also add the use of information and communication technology and advanced technology for early warning system. Adopt the best technology, innovation, and research which is being used even if by other countries for mitigation, preparedness, or we may say all the disaster management cycle factor should be covered in such technology. I mean, we can adopt such technology from other countries as well, which can be good for our country. So this is the key action points of point number 5. The next point of this Prime Minister 10-point agenda is develop a network of university to work on disaster issue. This is again all point are important. So what the key action of this particular point is, again it says the thematically focused network of universities and technical institutions. Example on earthquake risk management, landslide risk management. I mean, the again the thematically word is used here. The thematic areas. As I mentioned in the previous, that it has been introduced. It has been added by in National Disaster Management Plan. There are 6 thematic areas. So what else we can do to create to develop a network of universities which can work on disaster risk reduction activities. We can academic and technical institute have we can have academic and technical institutions, universities to be given the responsibilities of documentation, training, research programs in the field of disaster risk reduction concerning various disasters. I mean, publications, documentation is needed by different universities to have more involvement with the disaster risk reduction activities. And creation of center for excellence within universities is also one of the good idea which will be working on disaster risk management, and the work to be done towards how to improve mitigation, preparedness, response, recoveries measures. That is, here again, all the disaster management cycle sectors should be should be captured. Suppose if we need to mitigate earthquake, here I'm talking about in terms of universities what they can do. So suppose if we need to mitigate earthquake disaster, so we need to aware people with use of building codes. When they build their house, it should be in accordance with the National Building Code. But first, it's our responsibility to circulate these building codes to academic institutes. The risk mapping is another factor to mitigate earthquake and the retrofitting and so on. All we need all we need is to develop such training module and research module that covers all these factors. This can be done when this point number 6 will implement effectively. So now the next point, and this is also one of the important point, and this is particularly my favorite point, that says utilize the opportunities provided by social media and mobile technology for disaster reduction. Or we can say make use of social media and mobile technologies. So what are the key actions for this particular point? So these are some uh, key action points, but my point of view, extensive IEC campaign, that is information, education, and communication campaigns are needed to create awareness through print, electronic, and social media uh, to achieve this point. So if we talk about this particular social media, there are various genre of social medias are available these days. I would like to mention some of genre of this particular social media. Which, if suppose if we talk about music, then there are various online apps are available for online music to listen online music. The next section, the genre is question and answer mm, websites. Uh, say um, earlier it is Yahoo Answer, which is the question and answer site. The next genre is blog platform, where one can write their blog. The next is micromedia sites, that is the Twitter is a micromedia site, and social networking. It includes Facebook, we can say, and the next genre is SMS, voice instant messaging like Skype and MSN Messenger. And if we talk about video, then there is YouTube. So these all are the various genres which are available in the form of social media. Uh, so now let's see what are the opportunities are what opportunities are lies within this social media, to use this social media platform. So the first opportunity, I say public awareness, especially to vulnerable group about disaster risk and preparedness. And the second, I say the dissemination of early warning in impending disaster. The next is how people can obtain information about location and availability of preparedness services. This is also a point that shows the opportunities which are lies within this social media. The next one is various apps like various mobile app that tell us about weather. Some I would like to mention here, like Mawsam app, which is which has been developed by Indian Meteorological Department. Next one is by again it is developed by IMD and ICAR, Indian Council for Agricultural Research. And this is the Meghdut app is very useful for farmers. And the next app is Damini app, which is also uh, developed by IMD, and it gives lightning alert. And yes, recently we have seen Arogya Setu app, uh, which is developed by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, which is being used for self-assessment the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. So this is how social media and mobile technologies can be used to reduce the impact of disaster or in any disaster risk reduction activity. The so the next point is the point number 8 of Prime Minister 10-point agenda says invest in local capacity not only for response but also for disaster risk. We can say build on local capacity and initiatives to enhance disaster risk reduction. This is um, again one of the important point as here I would like to mention that the National Disaster Management Plan vision to be followed for this. I mean, make India disaster resilient across all sectors, achieve substantial and inclusive disaster risk reduction by building local capacities, starting with the poor and decreasing significantly the loss of life, livelihood, and also assets in different form, including economic, physical, social, cultural, and economical environmental, while enhancing the ability to cope with disaster at all levels. Strengthen disaster risk governance at all levels. Sorry, these are the some reaction points. Forgot forgot to move the slide. Sorry. So strengthen disaster risk governance at all levels from local to center and empower both local authorities and communities as at partner to reduce the managed disaster risk. I mean, the point says the initial to initiate national program on community-based disaster risk reduction on lines of erstwhile Government of India and United Nations Development Program. In the earlier previous years, United Nations Development Program helped Government of India to establish a base structure of disaster risk reduction phenomena in India. So here again, we would require such collaboration to achieve this point. And here the term is mentioned community-based disaster risk reduction. So the CBDRR is quite relevant with this point. CBDRR, if it is itself a big, vast point. So what CBDRR says that the communities are the first responder in case of any disaster. Therefore, CBDRR, that is community-based disaster risk reduction, uh, should be the core of any risk reduction approach. CBDRR reduces vulnerability, and strengthen people capacity to cope with hazard, which also help in reduce vulnerability and increase the capabilities of vulnerable groups and communities to cope with or prevent or minimize loss and damage of life and property and environmental also. It also help the CBDRR also help in minimize human suffering, faster recovery, and it is important for effective DRR as well. So for effective DRR, the people participation is important. Priorities should be set for the most vulnerable groups, families, and people in the communities. Risk reduction measures should be community specific. And the next is existing capacities and coping mechanisms are needed to be recognized for this effective CBDRR. And again, in terms of CBDRR, there is one more important point, which is role of NGOs in supporting and facilitating for this purpose. Role of NGO is also an important thing for this particular point. Okay, the point number 9 says uh, make use of every opportunity to learn from disaster, and to achieve that there must be studies on the lesson after every disaster. So this point itself speaks a lot that lesson learned from every disaster is needed. I mean, those big disasters that have been occurred in India, the lesson should be learned, and the documentation for the same should be done, and it should be applied if next disaster happening. So, what are the key points for this? Here? Okay. So the key actions for the point number 8 of sorry, the point number 9 of Prime Minister 10-point agendas are develop national build guidelines for post-disaster recovery, build back better. These national guidelines, I would like to mention here, these national guidelines are to be prepared by national disaster management authorities, and there are several guidelines have been already uh, drafted by the national disaster management authorities and are available on their website. One can also check there. So such guidelines should be developed which can help in post-disaster recovery. The term we used, build back better. That is, अब हम जो भी निर्माण करेंगे या जो भी हम कंस्ट्रक्शन करेंगे वो पहले से बेहतर होगा. तो guideline for this is must. The next is operationalize the best of PDNA, that is post-disaster need assessment methodology adapted to Indian context. So the post-disaster need assessment is an internationally accepted methodology for determining the physical damages, economic losses, and cost of meeting recovery needs after a natural disaster through a government-led process. In the National Disaster Management Plan 2019, that is NDMP 2019, Central and state agencies have been advised for documentation of lesson learned, best practices, success stories, etc. The best example for this is super cyclone that took place in the year 1999 and formed and touched down in India in the state of Odisha. And see the difference. And another uh, same intensity cyclone that took place in the year 2013 is called Feline. So in the year 1999, there was almost a casualty uh, between casualty more than 9,000, but less than 10,000. We can say at around 10,000 casualties were there in the super cyclone that happened in 1999 in the state of Odisha. But same intensity cyclone again took place in the same state in the year 2013, and this time it is Phylline, but the casualty was only in two digit. Casualty was in only in two digit. It is only for at around 40 to 45. So see the difference. 14 year ago, the casualties were almost 10,000, and now after 14 years in the year 2013, for the same intensity cyclone, it is reduces to two digits and 40 to 45. This has been achieved due to the lesson we have learned by that uh, particular cyclone. So we need such more lesson that should be learned from the disaster to mitigate the disaster impact. And we now move to point number 10. The last point of this Prime Minister 10-point agenda on disaster risk reduction says bring about greater cohesion in international response to disasters. Let's see what are the key actions for this particular point. Okay, so the first is key action. It says take steps to become a certified member of INSARAG, that is International Search and Rescue Advisory Group, in order to able to participate in international USAR urban search and rescue operations. So by this by becoming the member of such activities, we can enable ourselves to in an international cooperation. The next is the engage with international mechanisms such as South-South cooperation mechanism to support post-disaster recovery. And let's see what is the South-South cooperation. South-South cooperation represents the exchange of knowledge and resources between governments, organizations, and individuals in developing countries, or those from what is known as the Global South. Participation in international efforts and fostering partnership. Disaster is not an individual activity. It is same for all nations as well. Here we are taking about international. Here we are talking about international cooperation. So the best example is Nepal earthquake and tsunami that took place in the 2004. In the Nepal earthquake, India also responded to for the search and rescue operation in that Nepal earthquake. So it is the example of post recovery, post disaster recovery, international cohesion. And for tsunami, we also responded as a nation. India also responded to Sri Lanka, a country, for this search and rescue operation. So this is how greater cohesion in international response can be achieved. And that's we can also see the latest example in the wake of second wave of COVID-19. There were many countries who come forward to support India to provide various equipments, whether it's oxygen plants, whether it's the oxygen concentrator, and so on. So many countries come forward and helped India. So this is we can take this all activities under the point number 10 of this Prime Minister 10-point agenda. So I guess I have done my part, and I hope I have been given some inputs that can be helped to others to understand this 10 points agenda on Prime Minister 10-point agenda on disaster risk reduction. Now I would like to also I would like to mention that we also have another speaker. He is Mr. Mihir Bhatt, the director of AIDMI, and he will also brief us about this Prime Minister 10-point agenda with some examples on which they are presently working. So, without taking much time, I would like to Mr. Mihir Bhatt to kindly carry on with your presentation, sir.
Thank you so much. Can you hear my voice clearly?
Yes, sir, you are audible, sir.
Very good. And Badhamji, thank you so much for this opportunity. And I thank you and, of course, Bindal sir for uh, planning such an important area of work for NIDM. To give my regards to him. And welcome to the participants. My name is Mihir Bhatt, and I work with All India Disaster Mitigation Institute. And we've been working with NIDM for a long time, much before it was called NIDM. It was called NDRC, National Disaster Management Center. And I was watching the presentation that Babuji has done recently about the 10 points. And I would request him to put on the slides that I have prepared for this particular presentation.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm doing, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, please let me know if these slides are visible to you.
Yeah, I can see that. And when I'm finished, I will tell you next, if that's all
Okay,
right. Yeah.
fine, sir. Fine.
So, and participants are requested to ask questions as and when you want in the chat box. And Bhatamji, if you keep track of that, and if it is an urgent question, you can stop me and ask. And if it
Okay,
is
sir.
a question which can wait towards the end, we can do that as well. And as I said, I'm going to talk about the Prime Minister's 10-point agenda on disaster risk reduction. And my name is Mihir Bhatt, and I work with All India Disaster Mitigation Institute. And our focus is risk reduction for the poor section of our country, that is 40% of our country. Next slide, please. So these are the 10 points which you just have learned very clearly and succinctly from Bhatumji that the Prime Minister had declared, as you know, at the Asian Ministerial Conference. And these 10 points are not new in a sense that these 10 points are part of the Sendai framework, which was signed by every country, including, well, most countries, including our country, at Sendai in Japan. And from that, these 10 points have been drawn out by the Prime Minister's Office and NDMA, and keeping in mind what is doable, what needs to be done, and what is very important for India to focus on. So these are the three parameters. Based on that, this has been by and large taken into account. So these are very important 10 points that we need to keep in mind. I'm not going to explain the point because they are just explained. Next slide, please. I'm going to tell you that what All India Disaster Mitigation Institute has done with these 10 points. So the 10-point agenda on disaster risk reduction was announced by the Honorable Prime Minister and his inaugural speech at the Asian Ministers Conference, as I said, and it was held in New Delhi in November 2000. And the AIDMI have been dovetailing our work with the PM's 10-point program to achieve sustainable DRR outcomes in India and beyond. So all our activities either fall into one of the 10 categories of the 10-point program, and that is our way of focusing on the most important aspect that will contribute towards the national progress towards risk reduction. And the following slides that I will present will highlight recent, that is just in last 1 year, which are the projects and interventions carried out by the IDMI that align well with the PM's 10-point agenda on DRR. So this is just last 1 year. So obviously we've done more work since we started our work. And especially since the 10-point agenda was declared, we've done far more work on that. But I'm not going to go into the historic background. I'm just going to take 1 year. So in 1 year, for one organization, what's possible to do? What kind of actual projects and programs that you can run so that on one hand, they address the national priority, and on the other hand, that addresses the priority of the poor people of our country. So those are the two priorities, keeping that in mind, what is it that we have done. I'm going to present that to you. Thank you. Next slide. Next slide, please, Padma. Hello? Hello? May I have the next slide, please? केवल यहाँ पे करें स्लाइड में शायद तो नहीं लेकिन NIDM was uploading the slides. Let's do it from here. Just one sec, participant side. I think let me just use my
Hello, sir.
yes. Oh, you are there.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay,
No
we
problem.
yeah. If you change the next slide, or
Okay.
maybe I'll just handle it. Maybe you have some other work. So I'll be able to change this today. So the first one is, are we changing it? Okay. So will you be there if I go
Yes,
on?
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I am here, sir.
Good. So this is the first point, as you know, of making development sectors imbibe the principle of disaster risk management. And 3 or 4 projects we've done during the last year, which may be of interest to the participants. First, since we've done in the education sector in the state of Chhattisgarh, that how the schools as a sector, education sector, can include disaster risk reduction. And first, there was a pilot in certain number of schools in certain city and then it was taken over to a much larger number of cities and larger schools. And the learning took place between Chhattisgarh and Bihar state. So both were learning and teaching each other about how to move ahead. Maybe one was learning more and one was teaching more, but still it was a very participatory and partnership move. And that is something that we finished last year. So that's for the education sector. Then for the multi-sector approach of uh, integrating disaster risk reduction, what I'd like to give you an example is the virtual cadre training program that we did with the government of Kerala. And as you know, government of Kerala is very advanced in terms of reaching out to large number of people at a local level, mainly because of the decentralized work that they do, and also mainly because the district planning is done bottom up. And as a result, the money is also spent bottom up, and they have far more impact on the ground. And where we work on the groundwater, civil supplies, education, fisheries, tourism, panchayats, and local self-government plan. So these were the sectors where the disaster risk reduction was included in their ongoing planning process. And currently they are making plans for these sectors so that that could be reviewed by the peers and then the higher authorities. And then there will be money put in those plans to actually implement. So that's the second example. The third example is in the Indian agriculture scoping study, and that's in the agriculture sector. And what is happening, as you know, that Indian agriculture sector is very badly affected by a whole range of financial risk, political risk, as they keep on saying it on television, social risk in terms of children of the farmers don't want to work on the farm, they want to work off farm, off the villages. So how do you help with this Indian agriculture sector? And we were looking at what are the risks, disaster risk, climate risk that the agriculture sector is facing. And this was a scoping study that we did to see the disaster risk management, how that can be brought into the agriculture sector. So that was for an agency. So that's a third example. And fourth example is a multi-sector, multi-country series of consultation workshops to exchange lessons learned from floods, focusing on particular challenges and evaluation faced by response agencies and civil society. So we took one hazard, that is floods, and looked at multi-sector and multi-country and see that how the disaster risk management can be imbibed into that is how the flood management can be imbibed into urban management, into infrastructure management and development, and other similar important sectors so that it is mainstream. So that's first example of 4 projects. There are some more, but they are repetitive. So I'm taking this for last year that we worked on. Next, please. The risk coverage must include all, starting from poor households, small and medium enterprise, to multinational corporations to nation states. And during the last year, we had 2 examples where we started and finished the work in spite of the COVID. And one was assessing the pandemic impact on the women-owned enterprise and organization during COVID-19. During COVID-19, every organization, everybody was affected, as you know. And some people were more affected than the others. And 2 groups were more affected than the others as far as the social background is concerned. That is women. And women were more affected than men, number one. And number 2, the business activities, the economic activities run by the women and their organizations were far more severely affected. So we did the assessment of that to see that what is the impact of that on the women organization and what could be done to accelerate the recovery of these women-owned enterprises and organizations. That's one thing we did. And second thing, which is very important, as you know, is the corporate social responsibility related money that is being spent by large corporations. But to what extent this money that is being spent, especially on the COVID-19 pandemic, is having an impact. And we were invited to review some of the top 10, and some were not in top 10, but by and large, 6 or 7 of them top 10 and 3 or 4 from the middle and lower category of amount of CSR corporations. So we looked at their work and see that to what degree They are including all, that is women and Dalits and Adivasis and small businesses, medium businesses, informal businesses, scheduled labor, ethnic groups, minorities, so on and so forth. That's the second Prime Minister's program, and these are the two projects which I think are most important to share with you. And later on, you can ask more details if you wish in the chat box. Next, please. This is again a bit of an overlap with the first, but I've taken two other examples about women's leadership and greater involvement should be central to disaster risk management. And we are a very small organization, not very large with NIDM. Neither we have the staff or the budget or the campus that NIDM has. So our work is small, but we still decided to do something very concrete on women's leadership. And two things we've been able to do during the last 1 year. One is we did a roadmap for women's leadership efforts for social and economic development in Ladakh, long-term recovery from floods. If you remember Ladakh, there was a flash floods many years ago, and since then the recovery is taking place. And we don't only look at recovery in first 2 years or 4 years or 5 years, but we continue to look at recovery for a long time. For example, our work in Gurvich, Kutch, we are still looking at the recovery in the 2001 earthquake that took place in Kutch Bush in Gujarat and see what the long-term recovery is. But here we are looking at the social and economic development in Ladakh through women's leadership during the last year. And second thing that we finished last year is to look at the climate smart agricultural capacity building for cotton producing women farmers. As you know, India is next to China or with China, the most important country where cotton is being produced. And where the cotton is being produced, a lot of that is being done by the farmers, but all of that is being done by the farmers, but a lot of that is by the women farmers. So where either women are the leaders and the owners of the farm, or their husbands may be the leaders and owners, but they play equal, if not more active role in cotton producing farms. And then how do you be climate smart so that these farms are using less water, less pesticides, and having cotton which is organic and not harmful to the environment or the people who use. So that's an example of women's leadership in the agriculture sector. What could be done? Next. This is very important example, item that invest in risk mapping globally to improve global understanding of nature and disaster. Now, we are not a global organization, not in that manner national organization in a typical 20% of the world. But we said we will let ourselves be open and invite if there is any interest to work with us to look at risk mapping globally. And look and behold, we were invited to collect the views from the front line on community resilience. It's a global exercise that's going on in more than 78 or maybe 89 countries. I forget exact, definitely 72 different countries, where people at the front line of community resilience, what are their views about what needs to be done and what doesn't need to be done. And for that purpose, we were part of that exercise and we looked at the community voicing their views. And the second exercise that we did during the last year was South Asia Disaster Report and Transboundary Early Warning System. So we work with more than 80 different scientists, practitioners, UN agencies, civil society organizations, NGOs, students, researchers, all across South Asia, and ask them that what is it that we need to look at early warning system, both within the country, but also transboundary early warning system that we need to look at. And a very substantial report has come out of that. And currently, NIDM director, Dr. Chakrabarti, is finalizing the introductory part of that to introduce that report. So that is again our global contribution looking at the early warning system in the region, that is South Asia. Next, please. This is a good example to look at leveraging technology to enhance the efficiency of disaster risk management efforts. And two examples during the last year come to my mind very quickly, and I do want to share. The first example is the national research study for electricity users, trends, and hidden needs in Indian rural sector, which focus on emergencies. So when there is an emergency, flood or drought or earthquake, and there is no electricity supply, what do we do? So we need electricity usage, which is not dependent on the grid, off grid. So what are the possibilities? Batteries, solar, so on and so forth. It's a long list now which is emerging in India. A lot of technological options are possible, but that is from the supply side. What is it that the corporations can sell? But what is it that the people in emergency want? What is the demand side in terms of the energy usage is concerned for bringing in transporting food, transporting water, shelter, building construction materials, so on and so forth. So this is project looked at 9 different states. It was a national study to look at what is the demand side of renewable energy related emergency response. And I think it's one of the few of that kind that is being done, and I hope NIDM does something similar at a larger scale on their own. We'll be very happy to support it. There is also switching to online mode of capacity building development trainings and workshops during the pandemic. And that is not new for NIDM or you, but for to bring it to people who had not been part of online DRR. We made an effort to do that. So I wanted to mention it. It's not new either for the participants or for NIDM, but it's an important development during the last 1 year in the item number 5. Next, please, item number 6. Develop a network of universities to work on disaster-related issues. And we thought one way is to develop a network of universities, and that's very important. And NIDM is doing it brilliantly with a large number of universities. But is there any other way of doing it with less resources but more effect? And we thought maybe if we had a topic because of interest to large number of researchers across large number of universities, and if they collaborated on that particular project, that would make it very applied and down to earth real network of universities. Because as you know, the network is important, but if there is network and no work to do for the network, it is not that useful. So we decided we'll focus on the work part. And the work was to look at the transformation as a practice, exploring socially just and transdisciplinary pathways to sustainability in marginal environments. That is, marginal environments such as desert areas, such as coastal areas, delta areas. These three we have taken. We could have taken high altitude Himalayas, which we haven't. So in these areas, how the transformation takes place, what is the practice of this transformation, and how it will be socially just and transdisciplinary. So not just engineering, not just political science, not just engineering, but transdisciplinary. And with 28 scientists, absolutely brilliant. I'm very happy to work with them. I'm learning a lot, which includes Laila Mehta, Lars Soto, which includes Sina, which includes Roman from Japan, people and scientists from Norway, from UK, and 18 universities, 28 scientists and research institutes. They are younger group members as well to this particular exercise. And that's a very concrete example of a network of universities which is delivering something concrete by working together across disciplines and within the socially just disaster risk reduction framework. Thank you. Next. This is the 7th point of the Prime Minister's agenda, and it says that utilize the opportunities provided by social media and mobile technologies for disaster risk reduction. And this has been very important for our national agenda as well. We decided to focus on 2 areas. And one is a real challenge to implement hybrid method of survey to study the economic impact of COVID-19 lockdown. What was the economic impact of COVID-19 lockdown? And we did this policy brief with scientists such as Dr. Mehta, Dr. Srivastav, Dr. Sane, to look at the impact of COVID-19. So that was a hybrid method they were used, where there were direct field and the data collection face to face. There was also face to face, but on the screen, and that we used. And second is again a hybrid method development and survey of energy needs in communities in 8 states of India. So what kind of methods that we need to use hybrid? So which one should be face to face and which one should be screen to screen to make sure that we get the energy needs related to demand survey from communities in 8 states across India. So that's a method development, hybrid method development work that we did. And I'm sure NIDM has done this as well, and would be very nice to have a review of different hybrid methods that are developed during the last year to reach out to communities and affected population. Next, please. Item number 8. Building on local capacity and initiative to enhance disaster risk reduction. And I don't need to explain to you the importance of local capacity and need to build local capacity. And 3 projects come to my mind very quickly. And one I wanted to talk is of doing with the Bihar State Disaster Management Authority. Vyas Sahib is the key person there. He is the leader which is taking that exercise. And before him, Anil Sinha was the leader, who was also at NIDM when it was a center. And which then we worked to develop a district disaster management plans for 5 districts of Bihar with the local authorities. And the idea was that we, as civil society organization, do not plan and do not do the planning of the exercise. We sit with the authorities at the district level in their office and help them do the way and what they want to do as a disaster management plan. So we were the facilitators to help the authorities make their own plan that they thought was appropriate and important. Of course, we brought in the best knowledge, best information, technical capacity, understanding from other states, from other countries, from other disciplines, but it was their plan and we worked with them and we helped them do that. That was an important building local capacity immediately. Second example I want to give is Ajmer Dargah Sharif, and some of you may know. It's called Derek Nawaz. And there was a need to have a plan against the mob or the sort of crowd management. And we said, why don't you expand that from crowds to a larger disaster management exercise? And with the CSR money and team, we worked there in Ajmer and subsequently several other locations. But last year we finished that work. And the third is making cities resilient. And this was, we are focusing on 3 cities and we work with them to help them develop their own city, local disaster risk reduction strategies which focus on local capacities. So once the city has a plan, city disaster management plan, how do you turn that plan into strategies to reach out to large number of organizations and authorities and individuals within the city? So that is something we did. The making city resilient. And this was with the UN. And they were very happy to have this exercise done. And they wanted the representative of the elected bodies of these cities to move forward and share their experience in the Asian Ministers' Conference. Next, please. Make use of every opportunity to learn from disasters, and to achieve that, there must be studies or lessons after every disaster. And this, we've been very busy doing 4 different exercises which would be of interest to you. One was to standardize curricula for capacity development of volunteers on search and rescue on the Government of India and UNDP project. So we worked to standardize the curricula and capacity building of volunteers with that. And that is, now used across the country wherever there is a need to have volunteers on search and rescue. So that was an important piece of work and had a very countrywide large impact to hundreds of people where this material is being used. The second important work of lessons learned we did to look at the climate change impact on children in key locations in India. And that was something the typo locates, it says locations in India. And sorry about that. And that is something that we have done with two major organizations, such as one is a UN body, and that is UNICEF. We worked with Sadafdip sir and then David sir. And we also worked with World Vision and Esther and Blessing and Franklin and others to look at climate change impact on children. We used to do a lot of work on this and Save the Children uh, when rates was there, and we hope to do that again more often at a larger scale. We also worked capacity development of school institutions in responding COVID-19 pandemic in Ahmedabad city. And we first worked with 10 schools, and they got excited. So they involved 6 more schools each, so total 60 schools. And now that is being taken to all the schools across Ahmedabad city. We are not part of it, so we don't know exactly how it is unfolding, but we understand it is unfolding. And that's a very large spread of a very small effort, with very small money and very small amount of time we were able to do. So we are quite happy about it. And the last one is a Kerala flood asset study, and that is being done with the Kerala State Disaster Management Authority, Shaker sir, the planning board, which has guided the process and product as well. And we are also doing that, and of course that is initiated by FXB Center on Health and Human Rights at Harvard University. So that's the work that the Kerala Food Asset Study is doing. We are looking at two aspects with the focus on user feedback. Those who use the flood relief services, what is their feedback? And also panel studies. If you look at those affected, 3 months after, 6 months after, 12 months after, what's the difference that you get? So that's the study with you. Thanks. Next. And this is again very interesting, international response. That how do you link up local global, basically? And there is nothing that you cannot or should not do, because now we are so very well connected, whether we want it or not, on what happens in other parts of the countries, anywhere in the world. It was so tragic to see a few of the passengers on the flight from Kabul going out. The passengers fell down because they were hanging on the flight to get out of the country. But what was important to me as well, that as it was happening, not one or two or hundred or thousands people in Kabul, but world over people become aware that this is what has happened. Because instant awareness across the globe, and that was because of the social media. That wouldn't have happened without that. The two items we've done during the last year, one is a preparation of impact evaluation document of transboundary early warning system. And that is something I mentioned before, and that is being taken further by a group of alternative disaster risk reduction related thinkers and action activists, and which includes from Sri Lanka, Karen, Rona, Dr. Mehbooba from Bangladesh, and of course Achutbhai from Nepal and other people as well. And second is lessons paper on adapting humanitarian action to climate change. And that is being done now. And that to look at the global last 10 years, what are the adapting humanitarian action to climate change related literature is generated, and based on that literature, what kind of lessons that we can draw. These are the two important national, international, micro, macro, local, global work that we have done. Thank you. Next. And that's the end of my presentation. We can take down the slides, G, and I'm open to questions. It's 3:40 44, sorry, 40, yeah, 44, 45. We have some time for question answers if there are.
As of now, we have not received any question.
Okay. So if
I mean,
there's
sir,
any question, feel free to email that to me. Send your
okay.
question to NIDM and either Anil Kathe ji or Gautam ji, and I'll be very happy to respond to that. Dr. Chapa is also there, so maybe he can answer these any of these questions. Endpoints are very, very important to NIDM, so I'm sure the whole faculty is aware of that. And if anything specific to our own work, you can always send us. But I think I'd like to sum up by saying that these 10 points are not points for aspiration. कि ऐसा करेंगे, ऐसा होगा, ऐसा होना चाहिए. These things are actually, you can implement them. And as you saw in 1 year, we were able to implement all 10 programs, all the 10 points in different projects and programs, sometimes two of them, sometimes four of them, all across India and beyond in one single year. It is a small organization, small budget, small team. So each of the participants, if you really decide at least two or three of the 10 of these items, you can actually take a step further. And if all of us took a few steps ahead, we as a country will move much closer to the target of those 10 programs, 10 points that we have decided are very important to India to make India safe and protect its prosperity and growth. Thank you.
Sir, if you don't mind, I would like to ask you a question.
Sure. And who is
Uh,
this?
Sir, I'm Ajit.
Huh. Brilliant.
Sir, I would like to know that is there any recent activity which is being performed by All India Disaster Mitigation Institute,
Mhm.
which is specifically driven in context of 10-point agenda, Prime Minister 10-point agenda?
So in fact, none of the activities that we have done since 10-point program, which is out of 10-point program. But all 10 points simultaneously we are not able to cover because our programs and projects are smaller and shorter. So they are always context specific. So some projects will be covering 2 or 3 points of the 10-point program, and some projects will be covering 5 or 6 of the 10-point program that we have. But there is one example where we are working with UNDRR to help them revise the Asia Pacific Disaster Risk Reduction Plan, and which was done a few years ago. That's being revised. And both as AIBMI, we are giving input to that exercise directly. And through, as a member of a regional network of Nivaran, we have given our inputs into how these 10-point related activities can be implemented or turned into projects in the plan that is being revised. And there is also an Asia-wide network, ADRR, and very good Takashi-san and others are leading that. And we've submitted our points to them that they can also take these points further to add into the revised Asia Pacific plan. So these 10 points, which are specific to India, will become specific to Asia Pacific, at least to an extent, if not a substantial extent. So that's one area where all the 10 points simultaneously are taken. And second activity where all the 10 points are simultaneously addressed are on, we are looking at old cities and new risks. That in India, there are quite a few old cities such as Bombay, Chennai, Calcutta, they are in coastal areas, are facing new risks such as heat wave, tropical cyclones, seawater ingress, salinity rise, uh, near coast seawater heating, and many others. You should look at AR assessment report number 6, which gives a fairly good indication of the new risks which uh, we are facing. And there we are looking at all the 10 points together. And that's another example of that. Um, yeah, this is something that comes to my mind quickly. I'm sure there is other project, but most of our projects don't look at all 10 points simultaneously. They look at 3 or 4 10 points because one shouldn't try to do something which is not possible to actually deliver on the ground in such cases. Thank you.
Sir, if you permit, may I have one more question, sir?
Of course, of course.
Okay, so it is again from my side only. I would like to ask your perception on how you see the role of NGO
Um,
in building of local capacity.
yeah, I think in India, in the humanitarian sector, and this is my perspective, but the role of non-governmental organizations since independence has been very active and very important. And there were times where local civil society organizations and the governments were working together. And there were times when there hasn't been much work together. So there is international support coming to local organizations to carry on the humanitarian response and in many cases, disaster risk reduction response. 3 or 4 areas where civil society organizations have done very good work and we have just finished this, not last year, so I didn't give that in the 10-point agenda. This work is not finished. But we are looking at the civil society organizations across the country to see, Mr. Bapi, that what are the 3 or 4 areas where actively they have contributed and where contribution is essential. Without that, neither the government or private sector or community themselves can move forward. And those areas include one is the in understanding the disaster risk, because disaster risk is so complex and such a dynamic that for each specific location it needs to be re-understood in a local context by the local communities, and that can only be done with a joint action of civil society and local authority. So there, the authorities are very important. The last step of reducing risk. The second area where they are very, very important is when there is an urban governor, there is a national disaster management authority, state authority, district authority, you know, naam ke vaste, but they are all put it up at various locations and their presence and activity is increasing. Maybe it can increase faster and be far more effective, but it is increasing definitely. And in that particular capacity, that particular situation, the role of civil society, non-governmental organization is very good. One, it has been the designing the programs because they know the context very often far better than the authority does. And second, designing and second, making the programs accountable in terms of giving a feedback. ये हो रहा है, नहीं हो रहा है, चल रहा है, नहीं चल रहा है. So that's the second area. And third area, and I'll stop there, is the investing money where it matters the most. The government authorities have money and have the system and they can go to scale, but it is very difficult for them to do something innovative, something different, something small, something which is strategic. Because unless the whole system moves like a big aircraft carrier, they can't move. It's always slow movement. While the civil society organizations are like small boats, they can turn around very quickly and grab the opportunity to make sure that there is enough investment directly done in the communities. So that's an area, third area where NGOs have a great role to play if they have the resources from the district authority, state authority, national authorities. Thank you. These are the 3 areas.
Okay. Sir, we have received one question in our question and answer box, and the question is from Manusemi Murli, and he wanted to know that the universities that come, 18 universities for tapestry,
The,
is it understood, sir?
no, please. Tapes the universities.
Yes, sir. He just asked, sir, we may know the 18 universities for tapestry.
Yeah, so the most important one that are leading, I'll just tell you offhand, and IDS Sussex is the university which is leading and which is leading in terms of program development, also being principal investigator. Then, of course, there is IIT Mumbai, and Dr. Parth Sati is the leader, and he is leading the team from there, scientists. Then there is Kyoto University and Dr. Nobu, who is there in the Kyoto University, leading from there. We also have, for example, involvement of University of Norway or Norwegian University, and two of Lars Otto and Sina are leading from there. So these are the three or four most important universities. We have Anita Damodaran, who is from University of Sussex and historian on South Asia, especially on water and environment, ecology, and now she's looking at the risk and resilience in a historic perspective. So she's that university is there. Yes, these are the names of the universities and the scientists who joined. Those who are interested may get in touch with you, Bhakuji. And we have a workshop, actually a roundtable coming up on old cities, new risks. And I'll send you the details of the flyer after this meeting, and you can share with the participants if they are interested. They are more than welcome to join that. Thank you.
So this is all from question and answer session. So thank you, Mr. Mihir Bhatt, sir, for elucidate more these 10 points agendas of on disaster risk reduction given by Honorable Prime Minister of India. Also, it is nice to know how All India Disaster Mitigation Institute is working in accordance with these points. So once again, thank you so much, sir, for joining with us and giving us the opportunity to attend such informative session by you. Uh, we look forward to be in touch with you, sir. So again, thank you so much. So now I would move on to the introduction session. Now
So let me thank you, Bhakuji. Thank you so much, and namaste to all the participants. It was a great pleasure to organize my own thoughts in terms of the 10 points and our activities accordingly. So thanks for this opportunity. And if there is any question again, as I'm saying, please send it to NIDM and then send it to us, and we'll be very happy to respond. Thank you very much, and good luck.
okay, thank you, sir. So now I would like to inform all the participants that don't miss the second day of this 3 days training program on Prime Minister 10-point agenda on disaster risk reduction. Tomorrow we will have three speakers who are expertise in their particular field and who will be discussing on particular points of 10-point agenda. So tomorrow, first we will have Dr. Preeti Soni, who is a senior program consultant from Indian University and Institution Disaster Risk Reduction. She will be talking about develop a network of university, as she is particularly working on this field only. Second, we will have Mr. Anuj Kumar Tiwari, who is senior consultant in National Disaster Management Authority, and he will be enlightening us the integration of Prime Minister 10-point agenda on disaster risk reduction with the National Disaster Management Plan 2019. So again, this will be a very informative session. And the third speaker will be Ms. Neha Sivaj, who is currently a research fellow from Delhi Assembly Research Center, and she will be enlightening us with the particular point of Prime Minister 10-point agenda on women empowerment. You can say encourage of women leadership. So stay with us on day 2. And again, I thank you all who have joined this training session day 1 on this particular topic of Prime Minister 10-point agenda on disaster risk reduction. And we look forward to see you again tomorrow on same time. That is at 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. In case if you have any query and any questions, you can write us on um, our email ID, which is yp dot. I will write down here. You can directly send us to me, and we'll try to get your answer by there. So thank you so much once again for joining this training program, and see you tomorrow. Thank you so much. By this, Acha, and before signing off, I would urge to all the participants to kindly follow the COVID appropriate behavior. That is, wear mask always, and keep maintain social distancing, and and wash your hand or sanitize your hand regularly. With these words, I sign off from this today event. Thank you.